As a federal election now approaches, the influence of Trumpism is gaining traction across Australian politics. Clive Palmer making a comeback with his party and both major political sides ramping up their social media presence and strategies, focusing on nationalist issues like energy security and nuclear power. Nicholas Quinn is portfolio manager at Spadium Capital, joins us now. Great to see you on Ticker. Talk to us how you see the Trumpism manifesting in Australian politics during the election campaign.
Great to see you, Aaron. Yeah, I've been following on from Scuddy in the prior interview. It appears at this point that a Labor minority government is pretty much the forecast going around all of the traps at the moment and all of the polls. And I guess what that means for the future of Australia going forward. We've got several issues to cover. The biggest difference between the two at the moment is naturally the energy security and I guess some of the nationalism that's crept back in that Trump has brought into our political system. He's made this tariff war and let's make America great again. And I think some of that has been leveraged here in the Australian system, naturally with the election coming up this weekend. And the biggest problem we have with that is people like Clive Palmer that have now taken a bit more of a stand, a bit more of a text message campaign that people have been getting text messages. You've naturally seen the social media advertisements, the television ads, and really playing that nationalistic narrative that anti-welcome to country, anti-immigration, and possibly what does that mean for the silent minority of Australians who go into the ballot box this weekend and say, you know what, I actually agree with that. And they're not necessarily just Clive Palmer. There's the other independents as well, and naturally the power that the Greens have. A personal opinion, an opinion we have at the firm, is that the Greens may do a little bit better this year than they did in prior elections because people are sick of the two major parties. They've seen enough. They've seen both sides carry us now through COVID, and then obviously the inflation and interest rate environment we found ourselves in. You know, your average Australian family at the moment is looking at themselves going, am I really better off? Or I'm working, the wife's working, the kids are in childcare, taxes going up, fuel's going up, everything's gone up, the price of beer's gone up, the price of food and groceries has gone up. Everything in my life that I used to enjoy is now costing me more. Is it time to give someone else a chance? And I think that's really what people like Clive Palmer and parties such as the independents are really playing on that narrative at the moment to say, look, we can do a better job than these two major teams that haven't really delivered what they said they were going to deliver.
Yeah, it's a really interesting one because prior to the election, the coalition was actually leading the polls. They have been for quite some time. Many journalists were quite surprised that Labor hadn't rolled Anthony Albanese and that they had stuck with him. But it's interesting because we've seen now Mark Carney this week in Canada take the Liberals, who were behind the Conservatives in the polls last year. Well, they won the election, albeit not with a parliamentary majority, but still got over the line to continue as the leading party. The Trump influence on Australian politics will be interesting because the Pauline Hansons, the Clive Palmers, they're nothing new. Palmer spent $50 million 3 years ago on media, but didn't get a single seat. And this time around he's come up with Trumpet of Patriots, which is probably the closest you can get from using the Trump name without a lawsuit when it comes to politics. But it will be interesting to see whether there's any cut through for Palmer this time around, because Trump is a very polarising figure in Australia, and it seems to have been really debilitating for Peter Dutton, of course, the Conservative Party leader, who knows that there's a big group of Liberals who do not like Donald Trump.
Absolutely. And I mean, I think Clive's played the long game here. People are familiar with his party and his campaign now. I would say that the average Australian back once upon a time, several years ago, would think he was just campaigning for himself. He's sort of changed that tactic this year and has some other faces, most notably on those television ads. So you go, they are actually representing individual seats that they think they might have a chance of winning. Now, whether they get there or not is not really relevant, but it is disrupting that Labor Liberal vote that most people walked into the ballot box and said, look, do I vote red or do I vote blue? Now there's yellow, there's teal, there's green, and there's a couple of grey colours out there. People are going, oh, I actually do have a choice. And I think the Australian political system's evolved far more from what it was 10, 20 years ago, where people did just go, I'm a blue voter or I'm a red voter. It was as simple as that. And I guess that's for a very American style, red and blue, but that rising level and power and influence of the independents and the different parties is shaking up what people are willing to do with their vote, which is likely, as we said at the moment, looking like it's going to be a Labor minority government. And what are the questions going forward of how they push through the policies that they've announced, things they said they want to do, things they said they're promising to deliver. Well, that's great to say you're going to deliver them, but politically, if you can't get them through the vote, it's not going to happen. And yeah, energy policy, as we touched on earlier, is probably one of the biggest key tenets that Labor and Liberal differentiate on. Liberals were ahead for quite a while, and they've sort of fumbled the bag on the nuclear side of things. People have started to wake up to the fact, and you look at the Metro Tunnel project and the Westgate Bridge project and all the other projects that we've got around here, not just at the state level but at federal level. People have started to understand whatever the government says they're going to do and however much it's going to cost the taxpayer, let's just double the timeline and maybe double or triple the cost.
You're right. It's coming down to trust, right? Our trust in governments to deliver things. You can add the nuclear submarines or any submarines or any defence project to that kind of problem as well, and it's led to this malaise. What I've been interested, I'm not sure about you, but my friendship group who are around our age, everyone's saying they're going to donkey vote. It's been really interesting to hear that they're not saying one party or another. Quite often, I kind of think 10 years ago, the protest vote was for the Greens in my friendship group, but now they don't like the direction that they've gone through, for example, because of their opposition to Israel and moving away from the green tree issues that they were famous for. It became kind of the proxy vote, didn't it, a while back, for if you don't like the major parties, go green. But now that they stand for something outside of the environment, it's turning a lot of people away. And that donkey vote is pushing through, which means that social media, and as you say, those parties, the huge plethora of different options now playing into it. I read the other day that now we've got Clive Palmer outspending the major parties, and also he spent nearly $1 million on Snapchat. I wouldn't have thought there'd be a huge number of conservative votes in Snapchat, but there he is following that, I suppose. Trumpism, if Joe Rogan was around, I guess he'd be on there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, it's one of those things. Clive and his spending habits and the team that he's got around him, they don't really care who they steal the votes off. They can steal them off the red, they can steal them off the blue. They just need them from anyone. Yeah, I guess Labor's plan for energy security, a little bit more wind and solar focused is probably a little bit more palatable to the average Australian than what Liberals' policy was 7 nuclear power plants all over Australia. Everybody,
I've got to say, that was just one of the most disastrous things I've ever seen in my life, to announce that you're going to put nuclear power stations, but you're not going to necessarily say where for quite some time and leave it to the imagination in a country that is quite fearful of it. But it was also quite hard for the federal government because, of course, Labor supports AUKUS, which is nuclear submarines. We are going to have nuclear on our doorstep, so hard for them to campaign. I wonder whether Spain's issues this week will be playing into people's minds. Certainly the conservative media pushing the line that, well, we saw what net zero looks like in Spain, lights off.
Yeah, and that's the concern, really. I mean, Liberal side with the nuclear power plants, people are comfortable with nuclear. They just don't want it next to their house. Everyone wants it, but doesn't want it near them, and that's reasonable.
Yeah.
And then, you've got the cooling issues. How do they get enough water? That takes away from the farmers. And then on Labor side, you've got that solar and wind, as we touched on earlier, which is fantastic while the sun's shining and the wind's blowing. Gas and other materials making up the delta until we can get off coal, sort of mid-23, 24. But then they say, well, that's fine. We're just going to do rooftop and obviously solar farm-based systems. And then battery storage at the home. So you'll charge them up during the day and then you'll discharge them during the night, and batteries and discharge cycles and all the other problems are going to come with that we won't touch on just now. But there's a bigger question there of going, that's fine, we can go green, we can go net zero, but where is all the mining and the minerals going to come from that fill up these batteries, that make all of these solar panels, that make all of these wind turbines, and the servicing costs of the amount that goes into it? When we do have other alternatives, such as, we're naturally on coal at the moment, we've also got a lot of natural gas reserves. Is there a cheaper and more conservative path to energy security that isn't just solely green focused? I don't know if the green vote at the Labor side for energy security and the net zero emissions is necessarily something that's going to swing voters. The average Australian at the moment is just worried about how they can pay their power bill. They're not worried about where the power is necessarily coming from. That's not to say the environment doesn't matter, but it is a secondary issue to people going, I need to be able to feed my family, I need to be able to turn the lights on when I get home and cook my dinner on the stove. How that works, whether it's gas or electric, is irrelevant. I need to feel safe.
Yeah. And there's housing as well. Alan Kohler made a great point on the ABC yesterday that in Australia there's 9 housing ministers, and yet we can't seem to fix the problem, and it only seems to get worse. You could say the same about energy as well. What is going on? What's actually being done? Let's talk about the markets, because we've seen some sharp market rebounds this week. What do you think the pitfalls are that people should be looking out for?
it's one of those things. I mean, April's been a hell of a month. We were down as an index about just over 10% at one point, and now to finish the month up a few percent in the green. The fund has delivered just over 3%, which we're quite happy about, and finding a fair amount of dislocations out there. But I don't think anyone expected the breakneck turnaround that happened in tariffs. And naturally, there's parts of market velocity that are always going to happen. There's always going to be a COVID. There's always going to be a GFC. There's always going to be a housing crisis. There's always going to be inflation, interest rate, Ukraine, and now what we've seen this month with this tariff tantrum. And investors who are going to park their money for the long term need to be prepared for those events happening and not let that spook them when they occur. Some investors have seen it as a great buying opportunity this month, and they've been handsomely rewarded. But the larger question remains is that if you're prepared to invest for the long term, you can't let these short term spikes up or down affect your emotions and allow yourself to pull out. If you had pulled out in the middle of April, you've lost that 10% there. That could be your expected return for the entire year. Most people are happy with a 7 or 8% return. You miss that 10%, you've missed your entire 12-month window. So dollar cost averaging, being diversified, having your investments across multiple asset classes are all very important. But we do sometimes discuss with investors and some of our peers in this industry, equities are a hell of a beast because they're priced not only every day but every minute. You can see the changes, you can see the pain, and you can see the triumph when they come back online. No one in their right mind hires a real estate agent, apart from the fact this would be very expensive, and auctions their house 7 days a week for 52 weeks of the year. Because some days it's raining, some days it's cold, some days people have got lower and higher interest rates. Sometimes people just don't want to turn up to an auction on a Tuesday. And if you did that, the price of your home that it sold for would go up and down as well. But you just don't see it because the average holding period in Australia is just over 7 years. So getting into that mindset of saying, I'm going to make an investment in this particular asset segment and sticking with it for a longer duration, irrespective of the bumps that are going to come along the way, is exceptionally important to anyone's investment horizon.
All right, Nicholas Quinn, appreciate your time. Great to have you here on Ticker. Thank you.
Thanks for having us, Aaron.